she's radical, like, how's the Christmas tree? So like, blah, blah, blah. But yeah, maybe I'm doing the same thing as you, but I don't think I'm doing it.
I think maybe. Our first year of law school, and I rewrote the book in a month, which was dumb, and my wrist fell off. And then I had my finals, and my wrist fell off again. But I can tell you all about contracts.
Yes.
For doing that, I think you just have to, when you rest your book, you don't want to just draft it and then jump straight into revisions. At least for me, I think it's different for every person. But when you set something aside for like 6 months or so, and then you return to it, and you're expecting it to be awesome, and then you read it, you're like, ooh, that, all of a sudden, sometimes you go, I don't suck. That happens too. That also happens too. No, you find like the threads of stuff that like glimmers in like a mess, and you're like, ooh, I can't believe people read that. I'm so sorry. But yeah, I threw out the Star Touchscreen in its entirety, and I think it's hard, obviously, but you have to feel like you're honoring the book that you wanted to write. And when you read it, and it no longer is what you wanted, and you know that you can do it, you just have to hold yourself over the fire and just honor your work, honor your talent, and do what needs to be done, even if you don't know what's going to happen. At that point, I didn't know that the Star Touchscreen would sell. I had no idea, and I was also just terrified because of law school. And I think you just have to hold yourself accountable to what you can do and not be scared, because I promise you, you're not alone.
Do you guys have a quote from another author that you guys go to when you're like super scared? Let it share.
It's the last line of Lolita. I don't know. I know, right? I love pedophile books. No, but it's just the language of that for some reason always gets me through stuff. It's like, I forgot.
Yeah, Ray did meet everyone.
Oh, hi!
Alex
Did you memorize your last quote? Like your finish?
Well, my quote is, I can paraphrase it, but I love Shannon Hale, who wrote The Goose Girl and
Yes.
The Academy. And for a while on her Twitter, she had a tweet pinned that was, your first draft is just piling shovels of sand into a bucket to build a castle later. And so for me, when I'm drafting or I'm in the middle of revisions or whatever, I just try to remind myself, it's okay if it sucks right now.
Yeah.
Eventually, we can get it there, but you just need to do it. And that's the biggest block to writing, is just being too scared to go in and try it.
Totally agree with that.
So I think about that quote basically every day, maybe 3 or 4 times a day.
Can I add to the throwing out a book? I turned in Windwitch last summer. It was all ready. For the record, this book was due in April of 2015. I turned it in 4 months late. When my editor got back to me a few weeks later, I was like, I'm throwing it out and starting over. So I am now 2/3 into another draft, which for the record, as I've said, I had already thrown it out 3 or 4 times in its entirety before that. And now I'm 2/3 into what I hope to God will be the right book. And I'm a year behind, guys. And let me tell you, when you have an entire publisher waiting on you, the stress and the guilt and the fear is, like, I might cry talking to you about how that feels. It's intense and overwhelming. And so, but, like you said, what you said resonated with me. It's not the right book, and God damn it, I will do what I have to do to make this the right book. And like, it's a sequel, and I need to make it. I made a promise with Truthwitch. I have to keep that promise and take it up a notch with Windwitch. So if I have to start over a 4th, 5th, 10th, 12th time, I will.
It's not like
I will never go over it again.
So to answer Camilla's question, my new favorite quote.
Give me that potato.
Oh my God, I will do it.
That was like a battle cry. We should go write sequels right now.
Oh, I will not. I don't want to write a sequel ever again.
I was just thinking about your quote thing though, because obviously the last line of Lily has nothing to do with writing. And it's a really lovely line though. It's like, I'm dreaming of oryx and angels, the secret of durable pigments, prophetic sonnets, and the refuge of art. And this is the only immortality you and I may share, my Lolita. I love that book. And I love that quote because in a way, no one's going to remember the draft that you spend so much time on if you throw it out. That's fine. But it lives in you. You know, it's the immortality of that draft, how it continues to transform the things that you tackle as you go on and on in your writing career. You know,
you couldn't have written the
Yeah.
next one if
You couldn't have
it was
written
a
it.
stepping stone. You had to step on it to
Yeah.
get to the next one.
exactly. So you have to think about, I think, drafts as not just being thrown out, but just a building block for something later. It's going to be there. You didn't waste your time. I think that's the most important thing, not feeling like you've wasted any bit of your time. You did something amazing, and you have to celebrate that, even if no one else sees it.
That's nice.
It's like being in a science lab. Is anybody else sciencey or like?
Me too. So it's like, you know, when you go in a lab and you're like, okay, well, here's your hypothesis, and then you do the experiment like, you know, a million times. You're trying to like synthesize something and it's never been synthesized before.
Cool, man.
And you're like not allowed to wear heels and your hair is tied back and there's like, you know, chemical burns on all of your clothes. And no, it's like, you know, that old song. But there's this point where like, you know, every time it doesn't work, you found like another way to fail, but that's also part of your research.
Yeah,
And that
I love
becomes part of your report of like, you know, I found this thing and like it works its way into the final materials, even if it's not what you were hoping to create.
Yeah.
Because so I mean, there's like this is a terrible cheesy like Einstein like quotes that like you see in classroom posters. They're like, I found 99 ways to not succeed, but all you need is one. Like, if you think about it in terms of like being a science girl and like investigating, it seems like a lot true. But yeah, I'm like, oh, I investigated a way that seemed didn't work. Tomorrow I restart my experiment.
I like that.
Yeah, and
Your science posters were way cooler. Did you guys have like Carol, the girl that didn't wear her goggles? And it was just like Carol used to see and she didn't wear her goggles. Now she never will.
are you so minded? Oh my god, it was like the DARE program of science.
It was dark and it just, I think that's why I hated chemistry. Yeah, but I don't know.
Carol's dead.
Carol turned in draft, she didn't believe it. Carol's writing career never went anywhere.
Carol's dead.
Don't be like Carol.
I did some Facebook meme recently. I feel like I'm just a meme.
I don't know how
I
Carol.
would love to throw it to the audience. Q&A, like questions. Just stand up and be loud. Let's have a good dialogue going. What do you want to know from our panelists? Brave souls.
Come on, y'all.
We can't all be Ravenclaws here, right?
Yeah.
Good.
You guys talked about revising and throwing out all that stuff. Does it work its way back in? Does it
Yes.
not? How do
Yes.
you ignore it?
Knowing what someone doesn't say is as important as knowing what somebody does say, right? It's like if you've seen and you have somebody and you write it 50 times and they're like, I'm really sorry that did I miss your party? What a terrible example, right? And then you have a version of it where they don't say it. Then you're like, oh, well, I understand the alternate timeline of like how bad it would have been if it had been this way. So it's kind of like seeing all of the moving pieces and choosing the best versions.
I also mine my old drafts. Like I'll
Yes.
Instagram a picture after this, guys, because I'm doing it right now with this latest version. I've written like a setting before, so rather than rewrite that setting, I will mine through my bazillion Scrivener files until I find it, which is procrastinating as well. But it's like somehow less scary than just writing that paragraph again. And I'll go find it, and then
Do you split screen in Scrivener?
yeah, and then I move, but I also work mostly by hand, so I'll print it out and then move everything around like giant puzzle pieces, or I'll be like, I'm pretty sure I wrote this emotional beat at some point, let me see if I can find it. Because writing scares the shit out of me, I'm not gonna lie, like, writing is the scariest thing for me, but revising I can do because I have scaffolding. It's holding me up, and it's not blank, and I can do that, but writing itself scares me, so yes, I definitely mine the old stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I have books that, you know, were never published and will never be published, but I stripped them for parts, you know.
Yeah.
Like, the first book I wrote that I actually got an agent for, it never sold ultimately. And I kind of thought about the rejections I got from the editors, and it was pretty consistent with what they liked about it and what they didn't like about it. And so I kept thinking about all the stuff they did like about it, and years later, that turned into another series.
Nice.
Like different characters, but these specific ideas, you know, like specific elements, and that did sell ultimately. So yeah, It's never a waste of time.
And I see it often as an editor. One of my authors, the author of Mice at the Round Table, which will publish this fall, so not a year from now, but she wrote this character that she really, really loved, but there wasn't enough room for this character in book 1. And so I had to have the really hard conversation with her that we needed to cut this character completely. But then when she gave me the draft for book 2, this character was one of the main characters, had a really good purpose and reason, and I saw that she had used a lot of the paragraphs from book 1 that were cut, and she had full chapters for book 2 that were. So nothing's ever lost. You can always use them again.
That's kind of what I'm hoping. I have a couple of ideas that I keep trying to find a book to like put them in, and I won't tell you what it is because I'm still hoping that I can use it myself. But it first showed up in the sequel to my first book, which changed forms so many times. It no longer bears any resemblance to what I thought it would be at all, except the characters have the same names. Hey. And when it didn't fit into that one, I tried to put it in Rocks While Everyone Dies, and that got cut like I think draft 3-ish. And so I'm hoping that somewhere down the line, because I really love this idea, it freaks me out in the best possible way, and I need to use it, but I haven't yet. So hopefully I will get there too.
Is it the mirror scene?
So your draft that you submitted, what was the word count at the start? And then a question mark. They want to know what inspired you to write it, and will there be a sequel?
Oh, okay. Well, I threw out 90,000 words, which is nothing compared to, I'm sure everyone's.
It's still a huge amount.
It's not a huge amount.
I'm intimidated by that number. I never counted because I just don't want to see.
Yeah, that's another thing. I don't want to know because it does make me sad. So that's what I threw out for the original draft. And then when it published, it was 82,000 words. So I cut down a lot. If you've read it, I go on and on with descriptions. I'm sorry. And I can't help myself. So I had to take that out because even I was like, what? As for the inspiration, I grew up in a mixed race house. My dad is Indian, my mom's Filipino. They didn't teach us their native languages. So for us, the way that we connected to our heritage was through fairy tales and world mythology. And that's kind of how I found my way to it, because it just felt like every fairy tale, you've seen it all. They're across the entire cultural spectrum. And it's kind of comforting to know that we're all telling the same story. So that's why I wrote it.
And will there be a sequel?
Yes, there will. Not quite a sequel. It's about the main character's little sister. It's called The Crown of Persia. Yes, it's great. I love it. It's also not finished and dying. And it's due August 1st.
That's actually a great question. I want to ask the whole panel just briefly, where do you get how do you know that an idea is the one and that it will actually make a book?
The one. That's so romantic.
The one. But meaning sometimes you have false starts, ideas that just don't flesh out into a full novel. Is there magic? Is there divine instinct? How do you know when to, and how do you know when to stop if the book isn't working? I have no idea. I know. Well, so here's the thing. I wrote the Genie book. That was my second full-length non-fanfiction book. And the first one, I was I'm just going to put every fanfic trope that I love into the same book with werewolves and magic. It's going to be great. It didn't sell, which is fine, because it should not have sold. It was terrible. And the Genie book, I was yes, this is the idea. And that ended up being the one that sold, and that was my debut, and it was awesome. And then after I wrote those two, I had this other idea about these two dudes who have this sort of psychic flirty relationship, and I was yes, this is the idea, this is the one, and it totally wasn't.
Flirty relationship?
Yeah, it didn't work. And that feeling of this is the right idea got me through 70,000 words of not a book. And it took me that long to realize that it was super not a book. And then I had an idea for a cruise ship thing that was also super not a book by the end of 50,000 words. And then Rocks While Everyone Dies happened, and now I'm on a new thing. I don't know if it's the right idea yet, but I still feel like it is.
I just want to say, I think you won the title game.
Yeah,
You won the title game. Rocks While Everyone Dies. Yes.
That actually, it started out as a joke title, because there's a sentient cliff in the book that may or may not fall and kill everyone at some point. And so I was like, hey, that's while everyone
A
lives.
sentient clip?
Yes. That was my like stand-in title, and then my editor's like, I think there's a joke in here that I'm not getting, but I really like this title. We're keeping it.
I love that Barnes & Noble let you have that because I did not get that. Like we were calling Beginning of Everything the Severed Head book forever, and then I was like, oh, we'll just call it Severed Heads because I kept putting that on the draft title, and we put it in the contract, and like I think we like did the deal announcement. It was Severed Heads. And then I was like, oh, I'll just call it Severed Heads, Broken Hearts, and I'll have a comma, and it'll be really literary. And like, we got so far with that. Like, we had like arcs printed, like Barnes & Noble at the last minute was like, hold on. Not happening, guys. Yeah, well, it's called that in England, and it's called that in all the translations. So like, there's like purists. I have like title purist fans. So like, come to events, they'll be like, I have the British copy because I'm like original title. I'm team original title. Oh my God. No, there's like a team original title and team original cover like going on in my universe. It's so weird. But yeah, I'm like thrilled that you got to keep it. I'm reading it now.
Oh my God.
On the swipe, judging me. No, it's really but I'm so jealous that you got to keep your title. But did it start where you're like, is this a book and there's a sentient cliff in it? And then did you like start going from there into like actually an idea? Because I go from something wacky to something normal.
It actually, no, it was the exact opposite for me, actually. It started off, so I don't know if anybody's read Rock's Fall here yet. It just came out a month ago, so it's totally cool if you haven't. But you still can. So the narrator is this guy named Aspen, who is like a giant asshole. And the narrator of this book used to be a totally different character. It started out narrated by a girl who was like friends with Aspen's family. And as soon as, like the first time I introduced him, I was like, oh, this character is actually way more interesting. But not only that, she'll be more interesting as seen through the eyes of somebody else. Like the kind of character where you're always wondering what's going on with her actually. And it was originally just like this relationship between a magical family and a not magical family who knew what was going on. And then the cliff came into it, and I was like, I think this is a little more screwed up than I thought it would be. But I like it, so I'm gonna run with it. And I thought the cliff thing was a thing that was, it's like, this is the idea that's gonna hold this draft together, and that's the thing I'm gonna cut later. And it ended up staying, and I'm still not sure why, but okay. Other questions?
When you guys have to write emotionally charged scenes and you're getting really stressed out, how do you unwind or how do you get through that? Because that's always my struggle.
I recommend red wine. And or whiskey. Or.
Yeah, I personally can't write at all unless I have red wine, regardless of the emotional.
It's all this different. It's a terrible message.
It's a huge problem. And I'm over 21, so it's okay.
Okay, this is good. Okay, you remember Hemingway kills himself. We don't do that, okay?
Yeah, how much of red wine is okay for my health?
One glass, yes.
Oh, we are
How big is your glass? Is it one of those glasses that fits an entire bottle? I have so much respect for that. Like it's just a glass.
It's full of wine right now.
I don't drink when I'm writing because I'm like I need to keep this like emotional charge, even if it's like horrifying because I'm so method about like my writing, and it like everybody around me is like I cannot be around you anymore. Like my poor roommates, like my poor boyfriend, like all of it. I'm like I have to like go in a cave of misery and moping because if this character is like in this really dark emotional space, and then I get up from the book and I'm like. Wine and Netflix, and then I like try and get back into the scene the next day. It's like, you know, it's like walking off stage, like that like energy of like performing is like gone, and I'm like, oh God. So I just like sit there in my mope, and I like listen to their mopey music, and I like, you know, and I find myself like dressing like more like the character, and I go down a very dangerous path, and then like to get like once the book is finished, then there's like the red wine. But like I don't allow myself the exit strategy.
I'm really hoping you never do a story about like a serial killer.
Right? Yeah, it's about like my POV is what I write from. So like, what kind of emotionally charged charge are you talking about?
Like, you know, like scenes where it's super stressful or like it's a post-traumatic stress type character and it's one of those where it's like you're going down, you know what's going to happen to them, it's going to be bad, and it's like, crap, I feel
And you're like in first person too?
Yes.
Ooh, wow,
And it's like really like,
I don't want to
ugh.
interrupt.
I don't want to interrupt.
You're so silent.
I really struggle with those too. I don't really like feeling bad, so I don't want to make myself feel bad because I also go into a method place and I don't want to feel like that. And so I will put those scenes off and off and off. And so it's my kind of like, one, I write almost entirely by hand, which I know is weird to people, but one, it's really helpful for turning off your inner editor because you can't go back and change anything. It's down. So if you need to power through, you can write by hand and you can't change anything. And there's no Twitter. But also, it sounds really formulaic, but I find it really works well. Of course, I'm a layer writer, so I'll go back and layer even more. But following the 7 stages of grief for anything, any emotional reaction, even if the character like stubs their toe. If you follow the 7 stages, you're like, denial, no, I don't have time for this right now. Followed by bargaining, like, why, really God, right now? And then followed by anger, like, and then followed by whatever's next. I think the next one is depression. Like, oh, my shoes, or I don't know. You follow those even for like little emotional beats, one sentence at a time. It like feels really, really natural. It's a really natural way that we react as humans.
I will steal this.
It's very helpful. And I do it too for like I just had to write, spoiler alert, 2 scenes where people think characters are dead, and so I had to like, I won't tell you if they really are dead. I don't want to get that far. But let's just say that that's the reaction, and so I didn't want to write that. I was like, I don't want to deal with that. This is horrible feeling. So I follow the 7 stages, and then I can slowly layer it back in when I write by hand and make it more and more deep and real.
I actually tried writing by hand for the first time like 2 nights ago. I was, I got to Vegas early and a friend of mine was in town. She flew out early and I was like, oh, I'm sad she's gone. I know, I'm going to go to a wine bar and write fan fiction. So I did, and it was awesome. Like, I hadn't had that sort of like, you have to turn off the inner editor. I mean, what you said about Twitter not being there was not true, because your phone was there somewhere.
Like a sentient cliff that moves over.
Not unlike a sentient cliff. But yeah, like the turning off the inner editor thing, I hadn't done that in, God, years, and it was really awesome. I love that.
I write entirely by hand and I revise entirely by hand.
That's
it takes time because you have to then type everything in, and my wrists hate me by the end of like an entire day.
Yeah.
But it is the only way that I can turn it off and get it out and fall into actual creative flow.
Michelle, aren't you doing that right now too?
Writing by hand?
Yeah.
For one project. One project that I actually tried pantsing years ago. And it was the most fun I've ever had writing a book, but it totally was not soluble. It had so many problems. And I've rewritten it like 2 or 3 times, and it's been a couple years since I've really tried to work on it, but I have a notebook where I'm not drafting it. It's just brainstorming and figuring out what the book is actually supposed to be.
It's going to be so good. There's a question over here.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily know the point of my question. It's more like a statement that I need reassurance for. I have this problem for like the past year, so I've been writing between 2 books, and I'll get like mad at one and put it on a timeout and work on the other, and then like, back and forth, and I never really get far in either of them because I just get upset, and I'm like, you know what, you're not the one. I'll go back to the one, and like I don't know how to stop that or to like choose one when I get frustrated. So what do you do to make me feel better? Like, how do I?
Give yourself a deadline.
A deadline?
Because, like, we don't have that option.
Mm-hmm.
And if you are, presumably, you're clearly committed to this, and you want to make it a job, profession, just make yourself a good deadline. And maybe you won't actually hit the deadline, but you're not allowed to change. You're just not. Figure it out.
And also know that even if you do hate your book, that doesn't mean it's not the one.
Exactly.
We all hate our books at some point.
If somebody was like, I've never hated my book while I was writing it, I'd be like, what unicorn? Like, no, because the thing is having a second book isn't bad. Like when I got my agent, she was like, what are you working? I had two partial manuscripts, and she's like, which one do you want to do first? And that was my moment of commitment. And I was like, okay, called you Beginning of Everything first, and then when I sold Beginning of Everything, my editor was like, what's the next book you want to do? And I was like, I have some chapters, it's called Extraordinary Means. And so she's like, okay, so that's book 2. So, you know, you can be assigned an order like that, but you need to commit to like, what is going to be the chronology of, like, if you have readers who come to you as an author, which book would you want them to be their introduction to you as a writer? You know, which book do you want to debut with? Like, because it's not like you need to find the perfect book. People don't just write one book. If you like make a career as an author, you write a bunch. It's like, I'll do this one now, and after I finish it, 6 months or a year, then it's time for the next one. So it's not like you need to, it's not like buying a house. It's like, which house? It's like, you know,
They're not mutually exclusive.
They're not mutually exclusive. You can have a closet full of books. You just need to pick which one you want to like wear today.
You can try NaNoWriMo for that. It's a great way to get through a power to an end. Even if it's an awful end, at least you did it and you got finished.
And even like choosing one doesn't mean you can't like choose the other later. It's a little bit like dating. You just right person, wrong time. You can still do both. You're welcome.
And if we're going down that metaphor lane, like, polyamory is occasionally fine. As long as you're willing to communicate with both parties.
Sounds like you're in a love triangle.
I know a lot of people who can't write only one book at one time because their process is that one forms the other. And like you might have a week of only writing this book and then 2 weeks of writing only the other book or whatever. It's really just a matter of figuring out what works for you. I could never do that. I've tried it and it just kind of throws me so far off the rails that I'm like, what even are rails anymore? But I know people who can, so if that's your method, then go for it. Like try it out and maybe it won't work and maybe you do have to commit to one. Or try out the committing to one, maybe that won't work and maybe you'll get back to having 2 boyfriends at the same time. But yeah, it's really just a matter of figuring out what your personal view is.
I wouldn't speak for Sarah J. Maas at all, but like she has 2 series right now, and from her editor I know that she does both of them because when she's waiting on edits for one, she wants to get back to the other. So it's perfectly okay to do 2 books.
Yeah, or like Brandon Sanderson does that. He'll write, his series will come out in like staggering. So he's always working on one and then we'll jump to the other series. So you're waiting like 3 years between books, but he puts them out. He's just jumping from one to the next. So yeah.
You know, I just had a really bad deadline. I'm still in it. I'm not going to make it. It's terrible. But I had the same like 12 weeks to write a book and a screenplay, and because I was dumb, and I was like, I can do it, and everyone's like, you can't, and I'm like, I'll show you. Just so stupid. So I was writing this book, and I got to like page 50, and it's sold, and like I know when it's due, and like I did not have time to stop, and then I had to write an entire screenplay, and I was like, I can't do one in the morning and one in the evening. I can't switch. So I put down the book at like page 50, spent 2 weeks, didn't get out of bed, churned out the screenplay, set it aside, went back to the book. Like, I cannot mentally switch because if I have a really good idea, I don't know which one to put it in. But if I'm like, oh, I'm writing this until it's done, I know what those are meant. Like, I think you can have clarity if, you know, because it's like, you know, if you want to impress both books, you want them both to like have your cool witty remarks. So you wind up on the stage metaphor. But you can't have a threesome every day, guys. Is what I'm saying. Sorry, everybody's like not 14, right? Because I don't have my glasses.
I'm so glad my husband's not here.
Totally different situation. You have one book. You have one path that you thought you had.
I like your hand gestures. Sorry.
And then you end up writing an AU of your original path. And so, do you just write to the end of both of them, or?
No, I go with the AU.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, me too. That is my process for all of my books so far. Like I have this idea and like you know, like I said, I'm a pantser, but I always have an idea of what I think the plot will be, like just in terms of one character's emotional arc or something that has to happen before the end or something like that. And usually when I hit the 15 to 20,000 word mark, I'm just like, or this is way more interesting and maybe I could do this instead. And like that's usually your gut telling you that that's where you should go, in my case anyway. And then, of course, I get to the end, and I have to rip out the beginning and put in a new beginning. And then I'm like, here's a draft. Then I have to rip out the middle and put in a new middle. I'm like, I think this is it. And then the ending doesn't work anymore, so I'm like, hey, new ending. But, like, in every case, that never would have happened if I hadn't gone with my gut on the shitty first draft.
All right.
So, yeah, do the AU.
Totally agree.
What I was wondering is, do you write in order by scene, or do you skip around and stitch it up?
Every book has been different for me. Windwich has definitely been a stitch it up kind of creature. Also because I'm like, I'm procrastinating, and I'm also like combining old drafts for like any little snippet I could possibly reuse and it won't be wasted. But other books I've definitely read chronologically. I don't know if you guys are more consistent. I just find every book is a different monster.
I write chronologically. Sometimes I feel like I'm working up to one scene, like maybe it's a kissing scene, and I'm really excited to write it. And even if I want to write it first, I have to kind of feel like I've earned it. So I'm like going through the motions for everything before I can get to that. But I mean, I think everybody's different. I do exactly what you do.
I do that too because if I don't, I will skip the boring scenes. I'll never go back.
Yeah.
I learned that on my first attempt at writing a book. I was like, no, no skipping, and also pantsing.
Yeah, I have to write chronologically because otherwise there's no emotional consistency for me. Like I have to, even if the scene ends up being filler or something that I have to cut, like I have to take my characters through like one place where they have to be mentally before they can get to the cool scene that I can't wait to write. And usually it ends up being like the boring scenes to me are in fact the boring scenes objectively, and I cut them. But like I know that there's that one beat that I was trying to hit, and it usually goes somewhere else, and I condense and yeah. But chronologically, all the way.
You can also always fix it in revisions, you know, that's what they're for. Make sure you're done with the phone.
I was just wondering, you mentioned NaNoWriMo earlier. Have any of you participated? And if so, what happens with what you wrote during that month?
I'm gonna just throw it out there, me and NaNoWriMo, and tell you. So yes, I've written for them many times, and friends with the guys have written. I wrote my first trilogy, all three of them on NaNoWriMo. So yeah, I'm a big supporter of it. I don't do it anymore because now clearly my books take years to write now, and I can't do it. Guys, for the record, if you decide to write epic fantasy, you do not need to write 3 empires, 4+ points of view. Like, don't try to write Game of Thrones and then put out a book a year. There's a reason that he needs 6 years between books. Just for the record, throwing that out. So yeah, I can't do it anymore, but I'm still a huge supporter. I actually have I have a website, susandennard.com, and a newsletter, and I have like literally hundreds of resources that I've been writing over the years. And I have a whole NaNoWriMo devoted thing with like worksheets and stuff, so check it out.
She's the queen of worksheets. Her revision worksheets are magic.
It's amazing.
I use them, so.
Yeah, susandennard.com, not to sound like I'm pimping myself out, but I am.
We have to wrap up, so it's kind of, I guess that's our last question. Does anyone else have a NaNoWriMo thing? Because you need time to get to your next panel, so. Anyone else? Closing ideas or statements that we want to leave people with?
True to your heart, you must be true to your heart. That's when the heavens will pop and baby tell me you my love. More coffee than normal today.
That was wonderful.
I was feeling it. I had to get it.
Those are some Indian things. Love you.
So thank